Welcome to the Daily Globe. Please subscribe and hit the bell icon for more breaking updates. In a stunning and historic decision, the United States Supreme Court has struck down President Trump's sweeping tariffs, marking a pivotal moment in the ongoing debate over the limits of executive power. The ruling, which comes after months of legal battles and intense public scrutiny, has sent shockwaves through the political and economic landscape of the nation. The justices declared the tariffs an unconstitutional overreach of presidential authority, emphasizing that the executive branch cannot unilaterally impose such sweeping economic measures without clear approval from Congress. This landmark verdict underscores the importance of checks and balances at the highest level of government. The immediate aftermath was felt on Wall Street and beyond. The ruling dismantles a core pillar of Trump's economic agenda, sending shockwaves through global markets. Investors scrambled to reassess their positions, and financial analysts began to rapidly reevaluate trade strategies worldwide. The uncertainty rippled across continents, affecting not just American businesses, but also international partners and competitors. Central to the court's decision was the interpretation of the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEEPA. The justices found that this law was never intended to grant presidents the authority to levy taxes on imports, a power that the Constitution explicitly reserves for Congress. Legal experts say this clarification could have far-reaching implications for how future presidents wield emergency powers. Now, billions of dollars in tariffs that were collected under Trump's orders hang in legal limbo. Importers and exporters are left wondering whether they'll receive refunds or face new regulatory hurdles. The future of U.S. trade policy is more uncertain than ever, as lawmakers scramble to respond and businesses brace for potential changes in the rules of global commerce. This decision is more than just a legal technicality. It's a powerful statement on the limits of presidential authority. The ruling is expected to reshape the balance of power in Washington, forcing both Congress and the White House to reconsider how they approach trade negotiations and economic policy. Internationally, allies and rivals alike are watching closely, anticipating shifts in America's approach to global commerce. As the dust settles on a toppled tariff wall, the world is watching. The Supreme Court's decision will echo for years to come, shaping not only the future of U.S. trade, but also the very nature of presidential power in America. To understand today's ruling, we must revisit Trump's trade doctrine. Upon returning to office, Trump reignited protectionist policies, imposing a flat 10% tariff on nearly all imports and even higher duties on key partners like China and the EU. He argued these tariffs would revive American industry and force fairer trade, but critics warned of higher consumer prices, disrupted supply chains, and global retaliation. As the months passed, these warnings became reality. Costs rose, markets shrank, and legal challenges mounted. The stage was set for a constitutional showdown that would ultimately unravel the president's trade agenda. Today's Supreme Court decision is the dramatic conclusion to that battle. At the center of this legal fight is the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEEPA. Originally designed for targeted sanctions in emergencies, Trump used IEEPA to justify broad tariffs, claiming trade deficits were a national emergency. His legal team argued the law's broad language allowed for tariffs, but opponents said only Congress can impose taxes. Courts agreed, ruling that IEEPA was never meant to grant the president such sweeping authority. The Supreme Court's final word: tariffs are taxes, and only Congress holds the power to tax. This case became a defining test of the separation of powers in America. The outcome reasserts Congress's control over trade and taxation. The legal battle began in the U.S. Court of International Trade, where the initial arguments were presented. This court, known for handling cases involving international trade and customs laws, became the first battleground in a high-stakes legal war. The court quickly ruled that Trump's tariffs exceeded presidential authority under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, IEEPA. This decision was a significant blow to the administration, which had argued that the tariffs were necessary for national security. The administration appealed the decision, hoping for a reversal. However, the Federal Circuit upheld the lower court's decision, reinforcing the notion that the president had overstepped his bounds. The appellate court emphasized that only Congress has the power to impose tariffs, a principle rooted in the Constitution. With billions of dollars at stake and the potential for significant economic impact, the case drew widespread attention. Businesses, economists, and legal scholars all weighed in on the implications of the ruling. The Supreme Court decided to take up the case, recognizing its importance not just for trade policy but for the broader question of presidential power. The case attracted intense national and global attention, with media outlets and legal experts closely following every development. Legal experts were split on how the Supreme Court would rule. Some believed that the conservative majority on the court would side with Trump, given their general support for executive authority. Others saw this as an opportunity for the court to check what they viewed as executive overreach. The arguments were intense, with both sides presenting compelling cases. Trump supporters rallied outside the courthouse, confident that the justices would rule in favor of the administration. Meanwhile, opponents of the tariffs argued passionately about the dangers of unchecked presidential power. They saw this case as a critical moment to reaffirm the constitutional balance of power. Ultimately, the justices ruled decisively against the administration, delivering a landmark decision that would have lasting implications. The ruling was clear: the president does not have the unilateral authority to impose tariffs without congressional approval. This decision set a precedent that limits presidential power in trade matters, reinforcing the role of Congress in such decisions. It was a significant moment in the ongoing debate over the separation of powers. The ruling not only ended the controversial tariffs, but also brought relief to American businesses that had been affected. The decision was celebrated by many who saw it as a victory for the rule of law and economic stability. Additionally, the ruling clarified the boundaries between Congress and the White House, providing a clearer framework for future administrations. It underscored the importance of checks and balances in the American political system. The legal journey from the trade court to the Supreme Court has redefined the balance of power in Washington, setting a new standard for how trade policy is made and who holds the authority to make it. The Supreme Court's decision sent shockwaves through the global financial system. Within minutes, stock markets from New York to Tokyo were thrown into chaos. Traders watched in disbelief as prices crashed, wiping out billions in value. Currencies fluctuated wildly, with investors scrambling to find safe havens, while commodity prices spiked as uncertainty gripped the world's economies. The sense of panic was palpable, as news outlets broadcast images of red arrows and plunging indices, signaling a new era of volatility. The sudden and unexpected removal of tariffs created a massive policy vacuum, leaving governments and businesses alike without clear guidance. Overnight, decades-old trade frameworks were upended, and the rules that had governed international commerce were suddenly in question. Businesses of every size scrambled to adjust. Retailers rushed to change price tags, unsure whether to lower prices or brace for new costs. Warehouse managers checked inventory, trying to anticipate demand swings, while office teams pored over spreadsheets, searching for answers in a sea of uncertainty. In boardrooms across the globe, executives gathered for emergency meetings, urgently debating how to protect their companies and plan for an unpredictable future. Strategic plans were rewritten overnight, and long-term investments were put on hold. Meanwhile, governments faced the daunting prospect of refunding billions in illegally collected tariffs. The sheer scale of the task was staggering. Officials sifted through mountains of paperwork, and accountants worked around the clock to process claims and prepare refund checks. The result was logistical chaos. Companies struggled to reconcile shipping and billing records, while government agencies were overwhelmed by the sudden flood of refund requests. Confusion reigned as everyone tried to make sense of the new reality. International trade negotiations ground to a halt. Conference rooms that once buzzed with activity now sat empty, as diplomats and trade representatives canceled meetings and waited for new instructions. Around the world, business leaders, journalists, and diplomats waited anxiously in hallways and lobbies, hoping for clarity on America's next move. The uncertainty was stifling, and no one dared make a major decision until Washington spoke. Economists appeared on news programs, warning that the uncertainty would dampen economic activity and slow growth until new policies were established. Financial analysts cautioned that the ripple effects could last for months or even years. The Supreme Court's ruling, while ending one chapter of crisis, had unleashed a new wave of instability in global commerce. Cargo ships sat idle at ports, containers stacked high as companies waited for guidance before moving goods. For now, the world watches and waits for Washington to chart a new course. The fallout is immediate, the uncertainty profound, and the stakes for the global economy have never been higher. Every decision in the coming days will shape the future of international trade and the livelihoods of millions. Politically, the Supreme Court's ruling has ignited fierce debate in Washington. President Trump condemned the decision as a partisan attack, vowing to fight back and warning of dire consequences for American industry. Democrats hailed the ruling as a victory for the rule of law, while some Republicans quietly welcomed a return to traditional trade policy. The decision has deepened divisions within the GOP, with moderates now pushing for congressional control over trade. Lawmakers are already discussing new legislation to limit presidential power on tariffs, signaling a major shift in economic policymaking. The political landscape is shifting, and the battle over trade authority is far from over. For everyday Americans, Trump's tariffs meant higher prices on everything from electronics to groceries, squeezing family budgets. Small businesses faced rising costs and supply chain chaos, forcing tough choices, cutting jobs, delaying investments, or passing costs to consumers. Farmers were hit especially hard, losing export markets to foreign retaliation and seeing incomes plummet. Government aid offered little relief compared to the stability of open markets. The constant threat of new tariffs and legal uncertainty stifled business planning and innovation. Today's ruling, while disruptive, may finally offer hope for predictability and recovery. The impact of tariffs has been deeply felt across the country. Economists agree. The immediate future is uncertain, but the Supreme Court's decision could lead to a more stable trade environment. Experts predict Congress will soon pass laws to clearly limit presidential power over tariffs, restoring constitutional checks and balances. While sweeping tariffs may be gone, targeted measures, especially against unfair practices, are likely to remain. The political consensus now favors a more strategic, less unilateral approach to trade. Future negotiations will focus on complex issues like technology, digital trade, and climate policy. The era of unpredictable trade wars may be ending, but new challenges are on the horizon. The ruling marks a turning point in U.S. economic strategy. The Supreme Court's decision is a defining moment for American trade and the separation of powers. It reaffirms Congress's role in setting economic policy and forces a national reckoning on the balance between free trade and national interest. The immediate aftermath will be turbulent, but the ruling opens the door to a more thoughtful, bipartisan approach to trade. Future agreements will reflect lessons learned from this conflict, with stronger frameworks and broader protections. As the world adapts, the story of this legal battle will shape global commerce for years to come. The next chapter in America's economic future is just beginning.